Hi, this is The Philosophical Angle, and I am your host, Chris Angle, defining concepts in current media. I am the author of 4 books on philosophy, one of which is The Philosophical Equations of Economics, and these books are available free for viewing online at www.philosophypublishing.com. Along with me are our discussants, Professor Mark Brennan at the Stern School of Business at New York University. He's also the American editor of the Quarterly Review of London, established 1809. Good to see you, Mark.
Good to see you, Chris.
Also with us is Rick Samuelson. He graduated from Yale, has an MBA from Wharton, an MA from Tufts. He's retired from the investment banking business and is now an independent investor in the venture capital business. Good to see you, Rick. The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to examine the nature of the concepts being used in current media and compare the essence of the concept with the usage and circumstances in which it is being used. This week we're having a special program. We're going to summarize the trouble that's happening in the Middle East. So let's get to it. So, first we have the Middle East with all its various countries. And the strife is mainly in Egypt and Syria presently. Syria, as we know in the news, has internecine conflict. Syria has internecine war. And Libya is a bit shaky. You know, you've had the Benghazi scandal there, and it is not yet settled down. There are some places of stability: Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. Turkey is, however, it's moving toward the Muslim Brotherhood. It's moving toward an Islamic society with the election of Erdogan, and toward a theocracy. Although still a very stable country, but it is tending to move to more to the Islam side. The conflict in Egypt is brought in by the Muslim Brotherhood being elected. They did a poor job on the economy, tried to consolidate power, change the constitution. It brought forth demonstrations in the streets, mass demonstrations, to the extent that the military decided that it had to step in and govern for a while. In Syria, there's no conclusion yet. You've got one side, you've got a Sunni Al-Qaeda. Well, Al-Qaeda is made up of the Sunnis. And on the other side, in the conflict, you have Shiites. Their leader, Assad, is a Shiite, and Shiites are mainly from Iran, and they're gaining support. Syria and Assad are receiving support from Iran and Russia. Iran also has its form of Al-Qaeda, or terrorist gangs, which is called Hezbollah. So basically, you have Hezbollah versus Al-Qaeda in Syria and Egypt. You have the Muslim Brotherhood trying to hijack the constitution. In Turkey, you have Erdogan trying to take it away from a secular society onto a theocracy. So when you look at the picture, the overall picture, it basically is Sunni versus Shiite in most of the struggles presently in the Middle East. But this is nothing new. This is a perpetual conflict ever since 832, the death of Muhammad. Well, why is that? Right from 832 to now, they're still going at it. They're still having problems living together. It's very difficult for the Shiites to have peace with the Sunnis. So what happened? Well, the Sunnis, at the death of Muhammad, come from the father of Aisha. Aisha was the youngest bride of Muhammad, and it was said that she was his favorite. And she said that Muhammad wanted her father to succeed him in leading the Islam nation. And he was Abu Bakr. And they formed the Sunnis. On the other hand, Ali wanted to claim the throne of the caliphate in Islam. And Ali was the step-son-in-law of Aisha, which means he was married to Fatima, who was daughter of Khaja, another wife of Muhammad. The Shiites believe that this is a stronger relationship, and thus they followed Ali. And from the Shiites, they produce imams. The Sunnis produce the caliphates. And they both believe that the caliphate and the imam both represent that they will come back to earth to lead the nations of Islam. The Shiites believe that there's a 12th imam coming. The last one was 874. And he will bring with it the end times here on earth. They also believe that there's a spiritual quality in the imams, that they actually have divine revelations. They are actually divinely ordained from heaven. And the caliphates believe that the next caliphate, or in the future, a second Muhammad will come back and and become a spiritual leader of the nations of Islam. And that there is no end times when this happens. Life will continue with the spiritual leader guiding Islam. So, but if we get a decrease, if this comes to some sort of conclusion and the wars stop, a new form of aggression will start to emerge. And this is my conjecture. It'll be aggression toward Israel and the Jewish nation, because they represent the Western culture. They promulgated Western culture, or was one of the sources of what we have today in their culture, and they are present in the Middle East. And so their aggression of Islam will start to be centered on Israel once this conflict decreases. And after Israel, the attention to the Western world. So what should the U.S. position be with this turmoil of the Middle East and division between the Sunnis and Shiites? How should the United States approach the Middle East? It's an interesting question. I believe, looking at what we've just discussed, that the U.S. should support those sections of the Middle East societies that support economic, theocratic freedom. And our policy should be directed to those that have that ideal within their society, such as much of the Turkish society, and thus we should support Israel. We support the Egyptian military in their conflict with the Muslim Brotherhood. So enough for me of speaking. Let's see what the opinions are of our discussants, Professor Brennan and Rick Samuelson. Guys, what do you think about the situation of the Middle East? No one ready to come forth here?
Well, it looks to me as if it's deteriorating.
It is seem to be deteriorating.
Yeah, it looks to me as if it's deteriorating.
Any hope for it to conclude? Well, it certainly hasn't.
It appears as if.
I'm sorry, did you...
Well, it appears as if tolerance for. Yeah, it appears as if tolerance for pluralism is declining in several key countries, Lebanon, Egypt, and so forth, Turkey, and you actually see Christians and others leaving, refugees, just leaving these countries. I guess they see the handwriting on the wall, and that's kind of a distressing development, since these various religions have coexisted for so many years.
Well, I think I would take issue with that last statement, whether they've been really coexisting for the last, well, they've really been under siege since 832 and before. The entire area was at one time almost entirely either Jewish or Christian, and since the time of Muhammad, those religions and all others have pretty much dissipated down to a few in Iran and a few Coptic Christians in Egypt, and even those are now presently leaving. Christians have been fought against and have been pretty much banished from the society of Islam, as you have to pay the jizya, which makes it a very difficult situation for those who inhabit any society of Islam. So, but I agree with you. It's definitely deteriorating. And is there any way the United States can or should get involved and see if they can rectify the situation or bring peace or somehow make the situation better? Or would any interjection by the United States make it worse? What do you think?
That's surely the risk. I think the United States has to define its interest in the region very, very narrowly. And where terrorism threatens to interrupt the sea lanes or damage U.S. property, then there has to be a forceful response. But I can't see how building democracies externally, especially given all the resources that seem to be required, is ever going to be a practical solution in the Middle East.
Why not?
Chris,
go ahead.
Chris, can I chime in?
Sure.
Because we've started to get into some good thinking now in comparison to the proposal you launched at the end of your introduction, where you said that the United States should be promoting democracy and supporting those forces that are pushing for democracy in these areas. That's about the last thing we should be doing. For those of us who have a belief in realism in foreign policy, that is the exact same disastrous policy that had got us mired in Iraq for 10 years, wasting time, wasting American lives, wasting Iraqi lives, and wasting American blood and treasure. It's a moronic policy pushed by the likes of Susan Rice and Samantha Power, and I'm actually embarrassed to be on a show with somebody who's pushing it too. For those of us who believe in realism in foreign policy, from Hans Morgenthau, Henry Kissinger, we should care only about the American national interest. Rick touched on two things: making sure that the sea lanes are clear and preventing against terrorism. You might want to throw in the free flow of oil should be coming out of that region. That's all we care about. We are not responsible for the success or failure of any other states in that area. We are only responsible for the American national interest. once we start getting interested parties who want to push for American support of their little pet causes in that region, when we get stuck and mired, and we have replays of Vietnam again and again and again. And I'm embarrassed that you would even propose on this show a Susan Rice / Samantha Power Jacobin policy of spreading democracy around the world. That region, live and let live. From the Treaty of Westphalia, cuius regio, eius religio. Let them be. They attack us. Any trouble, reduce them to rubble.
Well, I would like to respond to that because, first of all, technically speaking, I didn't use the word democracy. I used the word economic. But be that as it may, because the two, I believe, are linked inexorably. So I believe that that we should not bring troops, but we can bring support to the societies, the sections of societies that have a ideal of secularization, of bringing forth an economic and political freedom to their society.
That's how Vietnam started. We sent over advisors, and before you went, we had 500,000 troops on the ground, 58,000 dead Americans, 3 million dead Vietnamese. Why don't you let American entrepreneurs go over there, let them bear the risk? Because honestly, people in that region look at this area, look at the United States and say, gay marriage, abortion on demand, these are things these people are going to shove down our throats. No, thank you.
Well,
it's completely anathema to what they believe.
I'm certainly for that because in Turkey we have pursued that policy, and economically Turkey has grown and done very well and is now a member of NATO. And so that policy of...
what a mistake that was. What a horrible mistake that was, letting Turkey in NATO. What a horrible McCain-esque mistake that was.
Good topic for another program, but nevertheless, the subject here is that Turkey has come along and has a secular position.
Chris, that started with Kemal Ataturk in the 1920s.
Correct. That's right.
NATO. Yeah, that's absurd.
But nevertheless, if it started then, it can start again. And if it started then, we can still do it now. It doesn't say. It shows that it's not an impossibility.
Yeah, well, Turkey's going the other direction. It's radical.
It is, and I agree.
And they've got a 600-mile border with Syria. Let them deal with it. In the meantime, the United States has no business there. We care about preventing terrorism, we care about the free flow of oil, and we care about the sea lanes being open. Otherwise, we have no dog in that fight, contrary to what a big portion of the American population thinks. We've never ratified a treaty with any country in that area to come to their defense. We ought to stop acting like we did.
Well, that's a good point. How do you prevent terrorism? And one of the ways to prevent that is for it not to come out of that region and focus on the Western world. Because as history has shown us, when all is settled in the Middle East, then they start to branch out and go to war with the neighboring societies. After Muhammad died, his troops invaded North Africa, and then after North Africa, Spain, and then from after that, they went into Europe, into Greece, and up into Eastern Europe, and got all the way to the gates of Vienna, got all the way to Tours. So we need to prevent another type of aggression outside of the area, and I believe one of the ways is to help to provide support for those areas of society that are already within the Middle East, and that'll help prevent terrorism coming from out
Chris,
of the Middle East.
Here's a better way. Why don't we stop immigration from that area of the world into this area, into our country? The 19 guys who are here who are flying planes with skyscrapers, we're all here on legal visas.
Absolutely good point. And
I don't really care, if they're all going to be mired in backward ways. They've got to deal with that. To risk American lives, to enrage these people, to give them a reason to want to come here, get visas, play by the rules, and then fly planes into our towers is just provoking them.
Exactly, and that's our own fault for that it happened due to immigration policy. One of the reasons is the immigration policy. I agree with you, Mark, 100% there. Immigration needs to be reformed so that things like immigrants or visas from the Middle East do not bring with it terrorism. So, let's get back to that point about no support for the Middle East. I believe that you mentioned another point whereby you want to keep the oil lines or lanes open. You can't do that without military support, particularly a strong Navy, to make sure that it remains as such. So so I assume you would agree with a naval presence in the Middle East. Is that right?
I agree with supporting.
I think the United States needs to maintain a robust naval presence in all the key trouble spots in the world within the amount of money it can afford given its rising debt levels. But to proactively engage in preventing terrorism obviously has to be done very carefully. You know, do you simply nuke all of Iran, or do you select certain specific targets? Do you use newer methods of disruption like software bugs or and counterintelligence, or do you simply, you know, blow up nuclear sites randomly? I think, you know, this is a very nuanced discussion and probably the subject of a different show, but certainly to maintain the presence we have had in the Middle East in recent years is A, something we can't afford, and B, it's not something that's working very effectively.
Okay, well, go ahead, Mark.
So before we go on the next, promotion of democracy crusade, we might want to heed Rich's words and consider the fact that we can't afford to be doing all these things, as we learned in Iraq, and we've got to pick our battles, and the battles we should be picking are only those that would support the American national interest, not the pet causes of certain Americans. We by keeping those lanes open, if suddenly we're out there, 100 miles offshore, and some Druze are killing some Shiites, not our battle, not our problem.
Exactly.
If Palestinians start launching, bombs into some area of Israel, we've given them Iron Dome. That's probably enough. That's their problem. That's not our problem, because their problems become our problems, and we can't afford it, psychically, financially, or in terms of blood.
I think I agree for the most part with your statement. We shouldn't have troops there, but I agree with Rick's statement. We need a naval presence, and I think, Mark, you also agreed with that and affirmed it. We need a definitely naval presence, but we don't want to commit troops, certainly not on the ground. There's no need. But let's say, how about the following sequence? What happens if Iran invaded Iraq or Kuwait, as Iraq invaded Kuwait back in the 1990s? Do you do anything about it? If you've got a presence of a naval presence, how are you going to keep the lines of oil open? Is that a possibility? Actually, we should probably ask, is it a possibility that could happen? Especially after the Iran gets the nuclear weapon and decides to kind of just open up its chest and flex its muscles. Are we looking at a more aggressive Iran in the future? What do you think? I think so. I think you're going to look at a more aggressive Iran.
It's certainly possible, but clearly the fact that the United States...
True.
Sorry?
But...
yeah, it's certainly possible, but the muscular response of the Iraqi invasion obviously has put that style of blatant aggression, country to country, relatively on hold, at least for a period of time. These things don't work forever, but it was a deterrent. The fact that we prevented Iraq from taking over Kuwait and taking control of an ever larger portion of Middle East oil was a deterrent. Do we need to do that, a priori with Iran? I don't think so. You respond to specific crises as they arise, and hopefully deterrent works 99% of the time, and they don't do it.
Well, that's an excellent point, and one that I'd like to discuss right here. Was there any benefit coming from the Iraq War? First of all, there was an obvious benefit of coming from backing Iraq up from the invasion of Kuwait, obviously. Now, was there benefits from our victory in Iraq?
There were Chris. There were huge benefits. Iran is exalting the fact that we deposed their number one enemy. That's a huge benefit for Iran.
Okay.
Benefits for the arms suppliers. They made tons of money off this. Blackwater is rolling in dough thanks to this. There were tons of benefits from this. Ask a guy sitting in a wheelchair or a guy with his new prosthetic devices. Maybe not so many benefits. Ask the widow of a soldier who gave his life over there. Not too many benefits. Ask us taxpayers, standing in the face of $17 trillion in debt. Not too many benefits. But there were benefits for sure. They just weren't in the American national interest.
Okay. Well noted. Rick, in your statement, did you mention any benefits for Iraq? I think you did. What was the benefit?
Well, remember, there were two wars. The first war pinned Iraq down back into its own territory and prevented the Iraqis from taking control of potentially a large percentage of Middle East oil. The second war was a democracy-building effort, the outcome of which we don't completely know yet. One could argue that the first war was far more successful than the second.
Okay, obviously, we agree. At least I agree. And but I have to partially agree with Mark. I think that probably the risk reward, the benefit versus what we put into it, the benefit versus the sacrifice of the Iraq War was probably not worth it. But I hate to say that because we committed a great amount of effort and sacrifice by the soldiers, and I'd hate to say
I think it's highly dependent on your perspective, Chris. It's like that. What is that Japanese movie? The classic Japanese movie where the woman gets attacked and it's seen from a different angle. Yeah. So depends on your perspective.
Okay. Good enough. Well, anybody have any? We're in the last minute here, so anybody would like to make some last minute remarks here? We got about 45 seconds. If not, I would like to.
I would stress this: the United States has put itself in a fiscal position which is unsustainable, and because of previous actions in the Middle East and an inability to control the growth and entitlements, U.S. options are, in any case, whatever the desired policy is, are going to be limited going forward. Very limited.
Okay, well said. Guys, I want to thank you for joining us, and our audience at home. Thanks for joining the Philosophical Angle, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.